Hello and welcome to this video. Today we talk with Warren Farrell, an advocate of the equality of people and also author of books like The Myth of Male Power and The Boy Crisis. Also, which I find very important, he is I must read that because I can't remember it, the chair of the commission to create a White House Council on Boys and Men, which I find really very important. So welcome, hello, Warren, and thanks that you're here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be with you and with David.
Right. So I just say a few words on what we're talking about. So my name is Gunnar Kunz. I'm a German author of novels and theater plays and children's books, and also books on men's issues. And we talk about the gender empathy gap. And there is a gender empathy gap day on July 11. To make people aware of the lack of empathy towards men and boys. We chose that day because of the massacre on July 11, 1995 in Srebrenica, Bosnia, where 8,000 men and boys were killed. And the important thing is that the United Nations had evacuated women and small children beforehand, but left men and boys knowing they would probably be killed. So MANNdat is one of the, well, it's the main German men's rights activist organization, and they organize this day every year, 11th of July. They have a website with lots of information about the gender empathy gap, and a professional press release, and an open letter to the United Nations. David probably can tell us more about it.
Well, yes, I can. But first, let me add that without the idea of Gunnar, we wouldn't have that day, in Germany at least. He initiated the gender empathy gap in 2018 and approached us for help in realizing the website and the day. Yes, without him, we wouldn't be here doing this interview today. So thank you, Gunnar.
Okay.
About me, I'm 50 years old. In my night job, I'm an advisor to the executive board of MANNdat. As such, I coordinated the tech team that did all the work that was put into the Gender Empathy Gap website. In my day job, I work in IT. What I would also like to mention that I think we had some advances in the way the Day of Srebrenica was portrayed in the newspapers. We observed quite a few newspaper articles that were published last Saturday. So that's a good thing. Well then, back to you, Gunnar.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, Warren, so let's start the interview. I would like to know, why do you think does this empathy gap exist?
Well, first of all, let me make it clear. Many people, the empathy gap is so significant that many people will go, "What? Men have rights and men have privilege and men are, sort of the dominant forces. So what are you talking about an empathy gap for men? Maybe we don't have an empathy gap for men because men have all the power and we don't have to have empathy for people that have all the power." And so, that may be so if you're in that place, let me just ask you to settle in for a moment and just be with me, and then I'll talk with you about why that gap is. But first we have to really clear that there is a gap. So for example, when boys are 14, or when boys and girls are 9, there's no differences in male-female suicide, and they're very minimal at the age of 9. But between the ages of 10 and 14, the suicide rate of boys goes from equal to girls to twice that of girls. Between the ages of 15 and 19, 4 times that of girls. And between the ages of 20 and 25, it is 5 times that of girls. Now, if that was reversed, imagine if girls' suicide rate went from equal to boys at age of 9 to 5 times that of boys at age of 2022, would you not know about it? And did you know about the fact that it's about 5 times as great and how quickly it goes up even after being equal when it happened for boys? So that's just one of 1,000 examples. For example, you probably feel that, or have heard many, many times, that with domestic violence, that this is mostly in your mind from male to female. But now there was a study done in the 1970s by Straus and Gelles and another female researcher that found that males and females commit domestic violence acts about equally. And so the feminists were up in arms about that, saying that's ridiculous. And so, to the feminists' credit, about 100 additional studies were done, mostly by women and mostly by feminist scholars, to discover whether, in fact, men and women did abuse each other about equally in relationships. And they almost all came up with, yes, they do, except for the ones on dating issues, which found that girls admitted that they were far more likely to initiate the first slap or punch or to their male dating partner than males were to do it to their female dating partner. And so when the feminists did the studies, they said, you can't really trust men saying these things, so we'll ask the women and the men. And so they did ask the women and the men, and even the women said in the adult domestic violence areas that they were more likely to be the first ones to hit their husbands or their long-term male partners than vice versa. And the men said the same thing, but the men said that the percentage of difference was much greater than the women said it was. But both acknowledged that women were the more likely initiators. Now, have you heard that? Yeah. And so the empathy gap is that we are all over the importance of men not hitting women, but we're not all over the importance of women not hitting men. And the result of that empathy gap is that we have constructed policy that is very destructive, not just to men, but to both sexes. So for example, we create, in the United States, we have a Violence Against Women Act. It's one of the best funded after the Defense Department and a few other major acts. It is one of the best funded pieces of legislation in the United States. But it devotes all of its attention and emphasis to creating shelters, domestic violence shelters for women. And so when the women go into so that's a problem by itself, because let's say a man and woman get into a back and forth fight, which is what most domestic violence is involved with, back and forth, not just one way versus the other. Isn't it anti-female that the women should be the ones that have to leave the home? Why should there not be shelters for men so that there's a choice between the man leaving the home for a while to get away from the toxic environment and or the woman leaving the home? But the result of not even being able to see that men might be the victims of domestic violence equally or more than equally, we don't create shelters for men, which then cut back on opportunities for women being forced to be the ones to have to leave the home. That's stage one of the construction of bad policy as a result of having a gender empathy gap. Stage two is that when the women get to those domestic violence shelters, they are told by the feminist organizations in charge, which all those shelters are handled by feminist oriented organizers. They are told that once a man abuses, he will always abuse. And so, sweetie, do not go back to that man who abused you, because it will only happen all over again. And so, don't get sucked in, don't get sucked back. Now that's terrible policy. what is good, and of course, it's sometimes true, and bad cases sometimes make bad laws, and so we have to watch out for that possibility. But there's a much, much, much better solution, and the solution is that when men and women get involved in domestic violence, almost always they get involved in domestic violence as a result of saying something that is critical of their partner, and their partner becoming defensive, and then the person that is saying something that's critical of their partner not feeling heard, and so that the other person has to escalate and make it a stronger statement in order to get heard, and then the other person feels more insulted and hurt and becomes even more outrageous in their response. And so imagine this. Let's say my wife is with me, and she says something to me, and I interrupt her. And so she feels like cut off, and so she's getting a little bit antsy about that. And so then she tries to clarify what she's saying, and I interrupt her, but this time I distort her and I counterattack her for something that she's done that's somewhat parallel to that. And so now she's really she's not only not felt heard, but her risk that she took to share with me a complaint that she had is met by my responding in such a way that attacks her, as opposed, so she's not been heard and she's been verbally attacked. Now, is she more likely, if I continue to do that, to be so frustrated as to slap me across the face or to do something physical? Yes, I think we'd all agree that the answer is yes. If, on the other hand, I said to her, and by the way, what I'm talking about now is what I teach. I teach couples communication courses for the last 30 years around the country. And part of this is what I teach. And so what I teach is much more complex than this, but this is a simple version. And suppose she instead said to me something critical, and I said, wow, thank you for sharing that. Tell me more. And then she felt like, okay, it's a safe environment. So she told me something even more critical. And I said, wow, that's not only true. I not only made that offense to you that time, but there was another time that I did something similar to that, and that must have bothered you too, and you didn't even say anything about it. Thank you for holding that in, but I really want you to be able to share what's on your mind, and I want to be able to support you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Is there anything else like that has happened that is upsetting it to you? And now, is she likely to hit me? I don't think so. She's much more likely to say, God, you made an environment safe for me to be able to express my feelings. However, the system I am describing is biologically unnatural. All human beings are programmed to not be able to handle personal criticism from a loved one without becoming defensive. We can't do that because, historically speaking, when we heard criticism from a kinship network or a tribe, we feared that criticism meant that there was going to be an enemy. And so it was necessary, it was biologically necessary to get up our defenses to be able to prevent ourselves from being killed, or alternatively to kill the criticizer before the criticizer killed us. And so that was functional for survival. It is terrible for intimacy. And so if we had a lack of a gender empathy gap, and we saw that instead of it's only men that batter women, women are victims and men are the oppressors, we would be saying something wrong is happening, that we can't hear personal criticism from our partners without becoming defensive. And therefore both sexes, and by the way, gay women and gay men also, the same in my workshops, it is indistinguishable whether the couple is straight or gay, because that gay couples who live with each other have the same misunderstandings and the same defensive mechanisms. This is built into the biology of human beings. But I've been able to train couples to not do that, and to have, in fact, to know that before they hear criticism, that they need to move into an altered state where their mindset is reprogrammed to temporarily associate criticism with an opportunity to be loved more deeply, because you're providing a safe environment for that criticism. Mm-hmm. But you can only do that when you alter your biological natural state first, and when you practice it repeatedly and consistently with your partner. It's a complex method, but it works. But the important thing that I'm saying here is that without the gender empathy gap, you're free to be able to look at issues like this that help both sexes be able to communicate more lovingly and give both sexes what they want, which is being able to be heard, being able to be loved, being able to not have to feel like they're legally married, but they're psychologically divorced. Yes, we're legally married, but we have children, so we don't want to get divorced, and we'll try to sort of hang in there, but they both feel like they're in a minimum security prison marriage. And so that gender empathy gap, unfortunately, has been, the seeds of it have been planted and magnified by feminist ideology that men are the oppressors and women are the oppressed. And that is deeply, deeply sad, because the intent, the purpose of the feminist movement at the beginning was to give women more options, the reason I was on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women, and I believe the leading male feminist for many years in the world, was because I so strongly believe in having expanded options for women, and to having women be engaged in sports and having every opportunity that men have. But I also believe in men being heard and men being understood, and what their lives, why they're committing suicide and why they're doing so poorly all over the world now, and why there's a boy crisis. That has got to also be understood. And it's in women's best interest that when men suffer, that they are heard, rather than being alienated and withdrawing into video games or withdrawing into drugs. Because every woman who's looking for to have a child and wants a father for that child finds herself wanting a man who is strong, is capable, is motivated, who's emotionally intelligent. And to the degree that we help create men like that is the degree that she is also nurtured by having a good equal partner, and being able to raise children, not to have the choice of raising children by herself, or raising children with an either immature man or a man oriented toward a lack of emotional intelligence. And so that's some of the importance of understanding the gender empathy gap. Now, the reasons why, I didn't even get to the original question. Here is why there is a gender empathy gap. Historically, in order to survive, almost every generation had its war. Almost every tribe had its war. And the way that tribe, that generation survived, the way we all got to be able to be more, have our own resources and be effective in the world, is every culture trained its boys to be thought of as a hero if they participated in that country's war. And so boys learned, basically, if I'm going to be a real man and I'm going to be respected by my father and my mother, like Uncle Joe is, whose picture is on the mantle there, and everybody talks about him so positively. He was in the service, and he died in behalf of serving his country. I want to be like Uncle Joe and be talked about very positively. So when the boy becomes 14 to 17, he practices football, practices tough sports to make himself stronger, disconnects from his feelings, because in order to be able to be disposable, you can't be so concerned that if you're insulted or somebody says something a little bit critical of you, you fold. You have to be strong, and you have to put on your game face, and you have to be willing to die. And so boys learned in every generation to do that. Now, when a boy learns to disconnect from his feelings in order to be able to handle death, no one can hear what he's feeling. So you don't have much empathy for somebody who acts out, who may slam something against the wall. You punish them for slamming something against the wall. You don't say, sweetie, what's hurting you? Nearly as much as you do for your sister, who, when she was hurt, cried. And then you saw the vulnerability in that crying, and you said, my goodness, sweetie, what's happening for you? So secondly, if your survival as a country, your survival as a family is dependent upon your son being willing to be disposable, it's very difficult to get emotionally attached to someone we know we're going to lose, to someone who the stronger they are, the weaker they are. So it's so important to understand that men's weakness is their facade of strength. It's so important to understand the deep biology of that in almost all human and animal species, right from insects to adult human beings. Almost all reproduction occurs, about 85% of reproduction occurs from a female who seeks out an alpha male. And so that alpha male, for example, I'll give an example of that, buck elks. Buck elks that are the most alpha by the perspective of the female are the ones that have the largest racks that they develop. And so the female then sees the male with the largest rack, and she is desirous of reproducing with that male buck elk. But no one understands that to get that largest rack, that male buck elk exhausts 30 some odd % of his calcium, minerals, and nutrients. If he doesn't immediately get rid of that rack after reproduction, he's likely to die if he doesn't replenish all his nutrients and minerals before the winter comes, and he's not able to do that anymore. So the male buck elk that was the strongest was actually the weakest. The process it took for him to become the strongest was the process it took for him to become the weakest. But the female fell in love with the strongest / weakest because the strength for a short period of time protected her from having to have sex with other animals that might rape her to have sex with her, or just seduce her to have sex with her, because and she didn't want to be vulnerable to that. So his strength protected her from that, and so she then. So and I guess the important thing to say here is that what we get from that is that men's weakness is their facade of strength. As you can see with that male buck elk, he appeared to be the strongest, but in fact, what created his strength was exactly what created his weakness. And that I talk about in the Myth of Male Power and in the Boy Crisis. If you really want to understand boys, you have to understand that the anger that you see in boys, that anger is vulnerability's mask. Wherever you see anger, just look for the vulnerability. Wherever you see this strong strength being built by a male, look for the vulnerability. And but we have not been trained to do that. We've been trained to assume that that strength was strength and that anger was destructive, and that we only respond to that. And so therefore we see much more males who are brought up, for example, without fathers. They are almost all of the mass shooters. They are all of the schools, the 5 most dangerous, destructive school shootings in the United States came 100% in the 21st century from boys with minimal or no father involvement. The ISIS recruits are boys and girls without father involvement. And boys without father involvement hurt. They have a trauma of dad deprivation. These boys who hurt us. Because they hurt us, the criminal population, the imprisoned population is 85 to 90% boys without fathers, young men without fathers. And so these boys are hurting. They committed the crimes. And so we don't have empathy for the men who commit crimes. We don't have the empathy for the boys and men who shoot up schools and shoot up our neighborhoods, who are the mass shooters. And we don't have empathy for the ISIS recruits, because boys who hurt act out and hurt us. And so we focus on the pain that we feel. We don't focus on the pain that they experienced that led them to hurting us.
Yeah, that's right. I have just started reading your book on the boy crisis. And the one of the things that I find amazing is you say the amount of time a father spends with a child is one of the strongest predictors of the child's ability to emphasize in childhood. In adulthood.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And one of the reasons for that, and this is really important, because one of the fathers, we don't think of fathers as being likely to increase children's empathy. But in fact, here's the connection. First of all, the data shows that the more father involvement, the more empathetic the child is likely to be. But the question still remains like, huh? That seems, are you sure you said that right? Because, you know, certainly fathers, they're often more likely to do things like roughhousing. Well, it's exactly roughhousing that helps to increase children's empathy. So let me make the connection there, because that's about as counterintuitive as you can get. So let's say in real life situations, the dad is more likely to say, take 3 children and say, okay, kids, we're gonna have some time for roughhousing. So he throws the 3 kids on the couch, and then the 3 kids go, oh boy. And so here's the game. The 3 of you have to pin me down before I pin the 3 of you together down. Got it? Yeah, Dad, that's great. And so the 3 of them jump on his back and, you know, do everything they can to sort of try to turn him around. And meanwhile, Mom's looking on and she's going, oh God. I just feel here that's going to be sooner or later somebody's going to be crying, or somebody's going to be hurt. But you know, the kids seem to be having fun, and I don't want to interfere. I don't want to be controlling. So I'm going to try to remain out of it. But I just fear that. Well, Mom is only about 99.5% likely to be right. Sooner or later, the kids do start, you know, somebody starts crying, somebody's hurt. And Mom goes, oh God, I feel so guilty now that I didn't interfere sooner. I let them be hurt. I should have known better. But at least now Dad, you know, I didn't have to interfere with Dad, and maybe Dad will learn his lesson and give up the roughhousing. But instead, Dad goes, you know, doesn't give up the roughhousing. He goes, you know, Jimmy, it's not okay for you to stick your elbow in your sister's eye in order to win at the roughhousing. If you do that again, that'll be the end of the roughhousing. Okay, Dad, no problem. We won't do that again. And so they go back to doing it, but they get caught up in the roughhousing. They are experiencing now something that psychologists call emotional intelligence under fire. That is, they've made an intellectual promise not to be too rough or to be non-empathetic to their sister's need to not have an elbow in her eye. But in the excitement of doing something, they've lost the willingness to follow through with that promise, until Dad says, Jane, you pushed your younger brother out of the way, and you pushed him too hard. It's okay to fake eye contact. It's okay to use leverage. It is not okay to push your younger brother so hard. That's why he started crying. Now, what the sister and the brother are both picking up is the difference between being assertive versus being aggressive. The difference between winning and thinking of somebody else's needs in the process of winning. But the children only learn that when the father says, which the father usually does, okay, I told you couldn't do that. Now there'll be no roughhousing till tomorrow night. Now Mom is going, wait a minute, this is twice in a row in a period of 20 minutes that the kids have ended up crying as a result of roughhousing, and you are rescheduling it for tomorrow night? Do you not ever learn? Maybe I do just have one more child to monitor. And so the following night is when everything is learned. The following night, Dad makes the same statement about not being able to be too rough and what rough is. And the children now, they know when their emotional intelligence is under fire, is being tested, they know that if they stick their elbow in their sister or brother's eye or push them too hard out of the way, they will lose what they want, the roughhousing. Therefore, they're beginning to learn postponed gratification. That is, the way I get more of what I want, roughhousing, is to be willing to postpone my gratification of immediately pushing my sister or brother out of the way or hurting them in some way in order to get what I want. They're also learning that people have needs other than my needs. And even when I'm excited and wanting to really win and caught up in the process, I can't just focus on my needs, the beginning of empathy. They're learning that it's okay to use leverage and a little bit of body, but not push my brother or sister out of the way. They're learning those fine lines of distinction between being assertive and being aggressive. Now, mom's saying to herself, I tell the kids all those things. Why don't they listen to me? Because a lecture cannot be absorbed when put up against the excitement of having something like roughhousing and the focus on winning. And the mom says, I feel angry that after a while, the mom says, I feel angry that I have to repeat myself over and over again. Dad says something once and the kids obey. That feels so unfair to me. And it does feel unfair to her, but the reason she has to repeat herself over and over again is because she usually, when the kids mess up, she usually repeats herself over and over again. And the trade-off for the kids of hearing mom repeat herself is not large enough to make the kids give up doing what creates a victory for them. And so the mom has to, and the kids aren't really learning the subtleties of what is assertive and what is aggressive from a lecture. Kids learn that from experience. And so dads make these types of contributions. What I've just described is just one of a dozen or so differences between male-style parenting, dad-style parenting, and mom-style parenting. But the outcome of the dad-style parenting is that it creates empathy. It creates the ability to be assertive versus aggressive. It creates the ability to have postponed gratification. And the postponed gratification is what leads children to be able to succeed both academically and in sports and in being a musician or an actor. And so the children who have dreams, who want to be an actor, musician, or be really great at academics, they can fulfill those dreams with postponed gratification. But when a mom raises children without that boundary enforcement, and moms can learn to do boundary enforcement, it just doesn't come as naturally to them in this way, and do the roughhousing, just as they can do that, but it doesn't come as naturally to them. But when they do that, when parents do that, then the children end up having two things. The gift of nurturance and protection and inspiration, and being able to see the gifts of the children that moms tend to bring to the parenting process, and the gifts of the discipline, the postponed gratification, the boundary enforcement that dads tend to bring to the process. And therefore the children are able to not just dream of being an actor or a writer, but have the discipline to fulfill that dream. And when children don't have that postponed gratification, they dream a couple of times, they fail at their dreams a couple of times, and then they become afraid to dream because they are afraid to fail. And so these, by not understanding and not having an empathy for the contributions that dads make, we are not giving our children the opportunity to have empathy themselves and be able to be as productive in life as we all want our children to be.
Yeah, that's another thing you say in your book, and I find that important too, that men are usually not used to explain what their contribution is. So that's why women, don't understand what their contribution is.
Yes, what happens as a dual phenomenon there is that women can't hear what men don't say. And men can't hear what the culture doesn't say. Some men say to me, until I read The Boy Crisis, I was a parent for a number of years. I have read a number of parenting magazines. I subscribe to this one and this one. Look, Warren, here's my subscriptions. I have never seen these explanations of the connection between roughhousing and empathy, roughhousing and boundary enforcement, roughhousing and therefore the child being successful. That what happens with a successful boy at school is that, that everyone wants to be friends with him, and girls want to be sexual with him and be romantic with him. And so he doesn't have to withdraw into video game addiction. He doesn't have to withdraw into drugs. He doesn't have to withdraw into porn in order to be able to have access to a variety of attractive women without feeling rejected, which is basically what porn is. And so this is the great gifts of dad, but mom can't hear what dad doesn't say, and dads can't hear what can't hear what they can't read in any of the parenting magazines and parenting books.
Another thing is, you were talking about the disposability of men. Yeah. And one of the sentences in your book, The Male of Myth Power, that always really got to my heart was a quotation you did from Wendell Holmes: "Every society is based on the death of males." Now, before I read your book, I never thought about it, and I think it nails it, and it really makes me so sad to think about it.
Yes, it really is very sad. And this is, I'm afraid, where the feminist movement has really hurt us in relation to the empathy for males, because feminist gender studies 101, if you walked into a class, and what I'm going to say now is what virtually every feminist instructor around the world would agree with, which is that we live in a patriarchal world, which is dominated by men who have made rules to benefit men at the expense of women. And I challenge every word of that. And what I'm saying in the Boy Crisis book and in The Myth of Male Power is, no, we don't live in a world dominated by a patriarchy. We lived in a world dominated by the need to survive. And in order to survive, we created roles for women and for men. Both sets of roles were based on expectations and responsibilities and obligations that both sexes had. Women sacrificed their lives. Women made the sacrifices of careers to raise their children. Men made sacrifices in careers to raise their children. That is, men don't earn more money than women overall. The statistics are distorted by the fact that dads earn considerably more money than moms do. And they happen to be men that are folded into the statistics. But when a man and a woman become a father and a mother, the dad is far more likely to leave a job that he loves, that is fulfilling, like, let's say, be an elementary school teacher, or be an artist, or writing a novel, or being a musician, or being an actor. These are all fulfilling occupations. The more fulfilling an occupation is, as a rule, the less it pays. So dads give up fulfilling occupations to do things that are less fulfilling, that pay more. It pays more to sell product X than it does to teach in elementary school or junior high school. And so or he becomes a principal in the school, but he really loves, his heart is in teaching. He hates administration, but he does administration because he makes more money doing it. He can work year round doing it, and so on, and he supports his family better. So it would have been wonderful if feminists had said, the way we see the world is that when children come, moms often make sacrifices of their careers. Thank you, men, for making sacrifices in your careers. Thank you for feeling obligated to earn money that someone else spent that led to your dying sooner. We know that was your sacrifice, just like we had an equivalent sacrifice, as opposed to saying men earn more, therefore they are the oppressors. And so, when women say that, when feminists say that, everyone believes them. So it takes just one sentence for a feminist to say that. When I respond to that, It took me an entire book called Why Men Earn More and What Women Can Do About It to explain why that was not accurate. And so
That's right. Yeah.
it's a frustrating thing to have.
Yes, I think every one of us has this experience that you need to talk for hours. Normally, you need to talk for several times for hours. Then slowly there is a process of realization that not everything is as it seems.
Yeah.
I had 2 points on domestic violence, if I may. Did
Sure.
you um, did you observe that phenomenon in the USA as well? That more and more studies nowadays, or during the last decade or so, are only do only study domestic violence for women, in contrast to the studies we had last century, at the end of last century.
I have not observed that in the last few years, but I did my last major work on domestic violence around the year 2000 when that was incorporated in the Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say book. Although I know Marty Fiebert has done more recent research on that, and he, as of about 2010, there were still a continuing number of studies showing that domestic violence was both ways, and they incorporated both men and women in that. But what you're saying, whether it's true or not true in a precise type of way, would make it in a more in a broader type of ideological way. We have had, as you know, the hashtag believe women, and so there can be nothing that shows a greater gender empathy gap than hashtag believe women. Maybe the only thing that can compete with it, aside from cancel culture in general, is hashtag Me Too. Now, I, like most caring human beings, am very much in favor of hashtag Me Too, encouraging women to speak up. But what I am very much opposed to is that hashtag Me Too is a monologue, not a dialogue. I have spent my life trying to get men and women to understand each other, creating role reversal dates, men's beauty contests to help every man understand the beauty contest of everyday life that women are in. But and I've been asked many, many times to, excuse me, had a frog in my throat. I kissed it and it didn't turn into a prince. I've been asked a few times after I did these men's beauty contests and role reversal dates, somebody would come up to me and say, we had a young man here at our college campus accused of being a date rapist. Would you be good enough to talk to the woman, or would you be good enough to talk to the guy? And I say, I'll be happy to talk with both of them, but not just to only one of them. And so in the process of doing a 2 or 3 or 4 hour discussion with them and getting them both to listen to each other, it's never failed that they've both come out being stunned that they said things that the other person heard that they didn't remember being part of what they said, that they wore things, that they did body language that was remembered by the other person and taken as the signal for the other person, but not remembered by them. However, when they heard what the other person's experience was, they softened, and they learned a great deal about what they were doing and what that was not good signaling, that was unresponsive to the other person's needs, and so both sexes walked out of those sessions learning something, that they being more cognizant of their behavior, both verbally and non-verbally. And so when feminists say, what is there about no that you don't understand? I'll tell you what there is about no that you don't understand. No is verbal language. What there is about no that you don't understand is all the body language that may either coordinate or not coordinate with that no. What is there about no that you don't understand? Is no forever? I should never make another advance? Is no until a next date? Is no until I have a little bit more to drink and feel more relaxed? Is no about having another cup of coffee and feeling a bit more up rather than sleepy? Is no about spending some time talking more about me rather than you? Is no spending a bit more time talking about you so I can get to know who you are rather than just me? And those are all the things about no that we don't understand and that are complex, that make it simpler than a bumper sticker. And so, so what feminists have often done in their bumper sticker ideologies is discouraged is made something politically correct that is only talking about the female perspective and the feminist perspective, and not having a dialogue where men and women learn to listen to each other and hear each other's different life experiences and grow up being more mature, complex, compassionate human beings.
I wanted to add on this. What my impression is happening in politics with domestic violence. It seems to me that it's used to render invisible all violence towards men, and that's the first step. And then in the next step, some studies. We had a study 2014, I think, in Europe, where violence was studied. I mean, it was a questionnaire, and it was only posed to women. And then this is put together with domestic violence and creates an overall message that completely hides everything that happens to men. And through this, you again enhance the gender empathy gap, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And you do, now that you're mentioning it, I do realize that under the Obama administration a few years ago, before President Trump, there was, President Obama did work with surveys of women only on college campuses and ask, had they had any experience of sexual harassment, or date rape or rape, and they were all grouped together as if they were one. So if the woman had an experience of a man making an overture to her without that she wasn't interested in, that was grouped into that overall experience that also morphed into sexual harassment, date rape, or rape. And so that started circulating a statistic. And of course, they were asking that question only of women. And whereas we know, when we ask a different question of both men and women, saying, have you ever had unwanted sex? The percentage of men and women who have had unwanted sex is about equal. And most people go, what? I never know of a man who's had unwanted sex. But what sometimes happens for men is they get into the beginning, into a relationship with a woman they are attracted to and are interested about having sex with, and it's the first date or the first or second date, and the man begins to discover things about her that makes him realize that she is not going to be somebody he wants to have as a long-term partner, but she may feel that he is someone that she wants to have as a long-term partner, and he begins to see that is her goal, having him as a more long-term partner. But is afraid to sort of say no when it comes to being sexual, in part because he's still turned on, and in part because he is afraid of hurting her feelings and saying no. And that leads to him being able to answer the question on the questionnaire that he has had unwanted sex. But that statement that I just made in that study, it's about 99.9% likely that if you're listening to this, you have not heard of that study. It happens to be in the book Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say is all the documentation for that. But it's an example of what you were saying, David, and more accurately than I remembered at first, that we have begun to increasingly ask this question about have you been hurt either sexually or otherwise physically, only to women and not even to men. And that has enhanced and magnified the invisibility of violence against men. But again, remembering that the invisibility of violence against men is probably now in our genes, because we have epigenetically passed it on from generation of generation of giving social bribes to men to be willing to die so that we will live.
I have one more. Sorry, Gunnar. I
Yeah,
have
it's okay. Yes,
one more point regarding domestic violence. I think the best way, certainly for everyone, is if it doesn't happen at all. But if it does, then normally there is no place to go for men, and that's again, I think, an area where people can't even think of the possibility that it would be needed for a man to leave his home out of fear from his wife, and maybe out of fear for the safety of his children.
Yes,
And uh, I don't know if you know, but there is in Finland, the domestic violence shelters there are open to both sexes, and they live in the same house. I mean, for us, normally you can't even imagine this possible in the culture we live in, because it's so strange. But there it's normal, and I think that's a thing we could strive for.
absolutely. If we want to reduce domestic violence, I'll share exactly how it can be done. When there is domestic violence, there are shelters for both men and women that are both oriented toward, let's help this couple communicate effectively enough so that they can hear personal criticism without becoming defensive. They can not only hear personal criticism without becoming defensive, they can learn how to associate on the emotional level their partner criticizing them as an opportunity to create a safe space for their partner, so their partner will feel more deeply loved and therefore love them more. And when that type of structure is set up, we can enormously minimize domestic violence for both men and for women, and therefore minimize or almost eliminate the experience of seeing domestic violence from mom to dad or dad to mom, which has got to be traumatizing, which is traumatizing for the children. And so we all have an investment for our next generation and for the parents to have empathy for the failures of communication. That should be our approach to domestic violence, just like and that would increase the fundamental understanding that when either a woman is angry at a man, or a man is angry at a woman, or a gay couple, one of them is married, angry at the other one, that anger is vulnerability's mask. And let's look at the vulnerability and eliminate it so that the couple can respond with love rather than with anger.
Yeah, I think that's a good sentence, a good thing to say. There's one other thing, one other thought I had quite often. Society doesn't realize, I think, that men are really more dependent, emotionally dependent to women than vice versa. I mean, we always hear, that if a woman is financially dependent on men, that's terrible and things like that. But we never hear about the other thing. I mean, you can see that when one person of a couple dies, that if the survivor one is a man, he far more often commits suicide. So I think there is a far more stronger emotional bond this way around, and that, I think, stops men sometimes from, being honest about situations, because they fear, they would lose their lives.
Yes, everything about masculinity is to keep your fears, your feelings, your hurts to yourself, and that is completely destructive to boys and to men. And that ends up being, we often hear the words toxic masculinity. Well, that is toxic. And let's not deny that it is, but that toxicity comes out of a history of having no permission to be able to express your feelings and your hurts and your pains and to cry and be considered valuable as a man. So you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And so that's what we need to work on with men, young men, is to give more permission. Now, fortunately, younger men do have more permission as a rule to be able to express their feelings in some families than was ever permissible to be imagined a generation or two ago. However, the great majority of families are still saying, boys don't cry, and the recognition and the admiration of young men is not the ones who express feelings, but the ones who repress feelings. And the way to become a CEO in any company is the success is the pathway to success is the repression of feelings, not to say, I really don't think I can do this job. It's really hard on me. It's taxing me. I'm really feeling, stressed out. I don't feel competent to do this. We don't tend to look at the outcome of the person like that. We tend to say, oh my goodness, we can't invest more in them if they don't have that belief in themselves. So the parts, the fears, the doubts, the self-doubts are never able to be articulated as well.
Well, maybe one last question. This is David's question, though. David, you want to say it, or I mean, this is
sure. Actually, I had three.
All right.
What short answers I give. So,
Warren, I was wondering if you have an idea why men have so little empathy for other men.
Let's see. I think the expression, I just realized that I didn't completely answer Gunnar's last question about men in relationship breakup. So let me just clarify that and then come to your question, David. The data is now very clear for the first time that I found when I was doing the research for the boy crisis that when men and women break up in relationships, if the relationship is more than a very short-term relationship, the men become more depressed once you're able to measure depression in a way that incorporates the way men express depression, withdrawing into video games, withdrawing into drugs, acting out in a negative type of way. In the boy crisis book, I have 63 red flags of depression and/or suicide. That if you're really interested in, just look at those and see whether your son is manifesting some of them. And that will help you understand whether your son is going through, particularly after a breakup, an emotional loss. We have to remember that if for the way men attract women is by being the officer and a gentleman, not the private and the pacifist. Therefore, we attract women by being strong. And we get respect of men by appearing to be strong. So we attract women and men by denying inside of us what is weak. It is only after a while that the one person that we can admit our weakness to is the woman who's already had sex with us, who's already expressed a trust in us, and we can begin to let out some of our feelings and fears and inadequacies to them only after they know that they feel that in general we are Superman. We have to remember that Lois Lane had zero interest in Clark Kent romantically. She only had interest in the same man who appeared to be Superman. And it was only once he was Superman that she then said, I'm interested in your being emotional and you're crying. Superman, you should have the strength to cry. She never said to Clark Kent, you should have the strength to cry, because she didn't care about a man who wasn't Superman to begin with. And that's an example of what the catch is for men. But when men do begin to open up their heart to the one person that they feel they can open up their heart to, when the relationship becomes at that level or longer, that's when the man loses her, he hurts far more than it hurts her to lose him, because when her loss happens, she goes to her women friends, and her women friends say, oh, I'm, sorry for your breakup. That's terrible. I know that, but I want to tell you something. Jimmy, when he was with me once, he sort of flirted with me, and you don't want to be with a man who flirts. Remember that other guy that you dated once before? I think he was a lot better for you. You should find a guy who's really worthy of you. So after a while, she's feeling that, okay, all of these things, first she gets the empathy, then she gets why she really is better off without him. And that type of combined support leaves her feeling buoyed, more upbeat. Whereas the guys get a different type of support. I might go to my friend David or Gunnar, and if David and Gunnar were normal men, as opposed to men who are more broadened in their emotional intelligence, they'd be likely to listen to me for maybe a minute or two, and nod their head yes that sorry that that you had a breakup, and then move the conversation on. What did you think about the soccer game last week? What did you think about how are you doing at work? You know what, any other women? That type of thing. And if I particularly if I were sharing this with somebody who's a friend at work, that friend would see that I was. The more I opened up, the more I expressed my fears and weaknesses and vulnerabilities. If a promotion opportunity came around and somebody said, should we promote Warren or should we promote somebody else? That person that I revealed my weaknesses to might say, maybe we should promote that other guy because, after all, Warren's been going through a lot of stuff recently. He's been acting kind of strange. He's been, and so it works against me on so many levels to open up and share my heart with any other man. And the one person I have learned to share my heart with has now left me. And so that's one of the reasons that is what leaves those are, I hope, are some windows into why we need to be more empathetic to our sons and to other adult men. And so, David, if you go back to your question now.
Well, you kind of answered it already, but I'll repose it anyway. Why are we so little empathic towards men? And the next question, basically, you also answered in the same way, I think. But the next question would be, what can we do? What can we do
Yes.
about it? Right? Yeah. Okay. And then my final question, what I would be interested in is, do you have personal, what are your personal successes in working with men, maybe especially in the field of empathy?
I think the most success I'm having is for 30 years I've been doing couples communication workshops around the country. And almost always the couple that comes in on Friday feels much more in love with their partner by Sunday, the end of the weekend workshop. And the good news about that is that I've developed a system that I say works close to the 100% level when someone follows through with the structure that I create for them to be able to use for the rest of their life. And about 60–70% of the people do follow through. So that's the good news. The bad news was that almost everybody said we need to have this workshop out there for not just the people who are wealthy enough to be able to afford a weekend retreat at a retreat center, and plus the cost of flying to get there, et cetera, et cetera. And so the COVID virus led to the cancellation of about 7 of my speaking engagements, which led to the freeing up of time. And then the evolution of the technology of Zoom that we're using now has led to my ability to have 2 couples go through the entire workshop experience with me on Zoom. And now we're almost finished doing that. And then we will put that on, we'll edit that. And so people only have to listen to the best of what happened during that weekend. And then I'll be able to have it available at a much more reasonable price, for really anybody in the world who can speak English, and hopefully it will be translated into other languages as well. And so I think that that is probably, you know, in the final analysis, you know, if we can't hear each other, we are in trouble as couples. We're in trouble as Europe and China, Europe and Russia, Europe and the United States. We're in trouble between Israelis and Arabs in the United States. You know, this process that I've created can even help Republicans and Democrats understand each other, which is about as difficult as possible. And, you know, and I hope feminists understand me and me deepen my empathy for the best intent of feminists. So I think it can be applied at every level. The levels I've seen it applied to get away from the jokes for a moment, is, you know, certainly for couples, gay or straight, and then certainly also to almost every couple tells me that if they're still in the workforce, that they applied some of these techniques on a one-way street level to their employees or their employers to great positive effect, and then also applied it to their children and their parents. I certainly had to apply it to my father, who once told me that the work that I do ruins the lives of millions of people. And I said, why do you say that? And he said, because you're teaching people psychology, and psychology teaches people to do what they want to do. People who are mature don't learn to do what they want to do. They learn to do what they have to do. And life is, you know, if you're really going to become a man or train people to become full men, you have to give up teaching men to do what they want to do. You have to teach them to do what they have to do. And I said, Dad, people like you have created the ability for us to survive and be able to therefore not have to worry so much about starving. And you've created therefore the freedom for us to be able to do more of what we want to do, integrated into what we have to do. And so that's the evolution that I hope I'm getting across in our workshops. But you know, if I had responded defensively and said, well, you blankety blank, you know, I don't ever want to speak to you again, we never would have gotten to that understanding for each other.
Wow, well, great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. That's a good final word.
Yes, I think so too. Thank you.
So, yeah, thank you very much for the interview. That was great.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure too. It encourages me and motivates me to see that you know, the people in Germany that are as thoughtful and considerate and caring as I see in your eyes and your manner are leading the movement to have both sexes loved and understood, rather than, and to, you know, to understand that we're all in the same family boat, and that when only one sex wins, we both lose.
That's right. That's right. Okay, thank you very much. So
thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.